Can everybody hear me? Yes, excellent. All right. First of all, I'm going to be honest. I don't know much about this topic. You might be wondering then, why is she even talking about it? Well, I ask you to bear with me, since what I'm talking about today is the concept of friendship. More specifically, friendship between people. Although my dad suggests that I talk about my friendship with my dog. I don't know what his legs are doing in this photo. Don't ask. To prepare for this talk, I split my ideas into 3 questions. Number 1, how important is friendship? Number 2, how complex is friendship? And number 3, what are the pandemic's impacts on friendship? So a bit of an introduction. Friendship, according to the American Psychological Association, or APA, is a voluntary relationship between 2 or more people that is relatively long-lasting and in which those involved tend to be concerned with meeting the other's needs and interests as well as satisfying their own desires. So how important is friendship? Studies have shown that having friendships in your teenage and adolescent years leads to having a better mental health and stability in your later life. Take this study led by Dr. Rachel K. Nahr. It followed the same people from ages 15 to 25. For the first 2 years, once a year, they asked the subject to bring their best friend in for an interview. Then, each year, the subjects were given a survey on their self-perceived mental health. At the end of the experiment, 10 years after it had started, the subjects who had strong, communicative, stable friendships showed a decrease in depression and anxiety and an increase in their self-worth. You might wave this off as just teens growing out of their moody phases, which, let's be honest, most of them go through, present company excluded, but there was a pretty strong correlation between the stability of people's friendships and their well-being later in life, with subjects who brought different people to the interview each year, having in general the same levels of anxiety and such as before. But this is hard, isn't it? Frankly, I think I can say for many people that friendships are complicated. If you don't think that, good for you. Anyway, friendships can become especially complicated, dare I use the word turbulent, in times of transition. For example, moving to high school, moving to a new school, or even moving to another continent. As mostly international travelers, I'm sure we can all relate to that. For example, there are the people you consider your friends, but then they do something you don't like and you suddenly hate them. There are the people that think they're your best friend and you're just having like, yeah, definitely. Who are you again? And there are the people that you say you'll always talk to when they leave, and then you never speak to them again. I'm guilty of a few of these, much to my shame. But we don't talk about that. I decided to do a survey recently of grade 9s at WAB to see what they thought of the topic of friendship. Well, that was what it was supposed to be. But in the end, I only ended up getting 6 responses. So I had my sister send around to her college friends. That brought the number of responses up to 22. So a bit better. But it also gave me very varied answers to the question, have you ever had a complicated friendship? For example, I'd get a concerning amount of people that answered with friends with benefits. Which, kids, if you don't know what that is, don't ask, and I won't elaborate. With other people saying things such as toxic and competitive friendships. All of these are quite common. Not the friends with benefits part, I hope, but the toxic and competitive friendships. For example, just as a hypothetical, your friend calls you weird and leaves you crying on the bench of the primary school playground. This would never happen in your older years, since then you would just cry in the bathroom. Anyway, friendships can become especially complicated at the adolescent stage, since people are still trying to figure themselves out and figure out who they feel comfortable with. I've seen many people who see friendship as a lower form of partnership, comparing it to romantic relationships. For example, you get people saying, we're just friends. But I think that they are very similar. Of course, when I say that, I'm more talking about close friends, people you've known a long time and you feel a strong connection to. In fact, in my survey, when I asked people what they thought the characteristics of a good friend are, they said things along the lines of loyal, supportive, trustworthy, funny, and honest. These are the characteristics you'd want to find in a good romantic partner, right? With maybe the inclusion of physical attraction in some cases, but we're not talking about that right now. With that being said, I'll ask you this. How different is a strong friendship from a romantic relationship? Of course, from the perspective of adults, it might be a bit different. But keep in mind, I'm looking at this from the perspective of a 9th grader. You know, I think it's funny how quickly people think that the person you're friends with, especially if they're of the gender you're attracted to, is your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner. I mean, it's a bit weird, isn't it? You see someone, usually kids or teens, with their friend, and you think, this is definitely romantic. this is especially strange when you think about what romantic love actually means. According to the APA, again, it is a type of love in which intimacy and passion are prominent features. Some parts of this definition I skipped because I fear I'd be told to cut it out for the young ones, but I'll admit, I think that this definition is fair. But how, as a bystander, can you see from looking at another person's relationship if it's romantic or a friendship? This is sometimes even hard for the person themselves. I mean, if you've never had a romantic relationship before, it's a bit hard to notice the subtleties. Nobody actually goes out and says to their crush, "I like you." Nobody actually does that. Funnily enough, I'm being very hypocritical. In fact, once I was watching something with my parents, and two people made eye contact. You know the type, when there are only two people in the frame, like they're each other's whole world. Ugh. I audibly said, "I sense a potential love interest." Which, one, is a very strange thing to say, and two, is going directly against what I said a few seconds ago. But I guess what I'm actually trying to say is, one, you shouldn't think of friendships as less valuable than romantic relations. They both have their values. Two, you've really no idea what is happening in someone's brain. And three, shows and movies are sometimes quite lazy in portraying romantic relationships. Nowadays, you can't talk about practically anything without the pandemic coming into the question. You could say, "I love this movie." Someone would reply, "Too bad it came out 3 years late because of COVID." Or, "When's the next season coming out?" 2023. But even as I say that, I'm being hypocritical. So I'm going to talk about right now is the pandemic's impacts on friendship. Yeah, I can safely say that I was a mess during quarantine. I was having a terrible time. Yes, I was quarantined with my family, and I'm definitely close to them. So what happened? Look at that. Well, I'm just going to make a wild guess and say this. Friends and family are really not the same. The dynamics are inherently different. Since when you're with your family, there's generally someone who cares for you, but they're also in charge of discipline, which means chores. You'll never find your friend coming into your kitchen, why are there dishes in the sink? Or going into your room, why are there dirty clothes on the floor? Actually, the last one is fair, because why are you showing your friend dirty clothes? But Okay, I think most of us are inherently wired to dislike chores, but nonetheless they're important. But I digress, so back to friendship. With friends, you spend more time talking about things you like, doing things you like, and just relaxing. There's also inherently different topics that you actually talk about. Some things that you talk about with your friends would be awkward to talk about with your parents. This disconnect from others, other than family, led to a lot of people feeling an increase in loneliness and decrease in feelings of friendship. Don't worry, I'm not just making this up on the spot. There was actually a study that investigated this. Nice. It was called Changes in Social Relationships During an Initial Stay-at-Home Phase of the COVID-19 Pandemic, a longitudinal survey study in the US. A mouthful. No doubt, the pandemic was a difficult ordeal for all the people in the world. Some were hit harder than others. In fact, in the study, people who rated their health as low, and women, were more affected by the pandemic, with people with low-rated health feeling a decrease in emotional support, and women feeling more loneliness on average than men. But the pandemic wasn't all doom and gloom. In fact, this study shows that most people felt an increase in emotional and instrumental support. For those of you who don't know what instrumental support means, which is nothing to be embarrassed about, I didn't even know before I started talking about this, it means physical help, things such as chores, like groceries. We've probably all heard the stories of young adults helping old people with their shopping. Well, maybe just at the beginning of the pandemic, when it was less overwhelming. With that being said, this study was done in May 2020 compared to 2018. I think that the situation has changed since then, and with the fear of sounding melodramatic, I think that we will never be the same as before, and that our relationships will show that. I'm not here to preach to you. Yes, friendship is important. Yes, it's complicated. And yes, the pandemic is, well, safe to say, terrible. All I'm here to do is talk about a topic that I found interesting. If you take something from that, I'm happy. Maybe you'll realize that you've been neglecting your friendships. And hey, we all make mistakes. I'm not trying to make one of those wake-up calls. Frankly, we have enough of those already. With everything that is happening in the world, I just think that we all need to lean on each other a bit. Even though I kind of dragged romantic relationships through the mud a few minutes ago, if your partner is your best friend, then they count as both. They get a pass in my book. I'm joking, of course. Anyway, given the horrors we've been subjected to the last few years, I think we all deserve a shoulder to cry on. So I'll leave you with this one reminder. Talk to that friend. Thank you.